Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is California's Solar for Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, Effective Collaboration for Equitable Solar. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, and we have an exciting array of panelists with us today. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over some quick webinar logistics. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of our webinar. You can call in via telephone or connect via computer mic and speakers. You can use the orange arrow that you see circled here to minimize your webinar console if you'd like to view the presentation full screen. And you can also use that orange arrow to expand your webinar console. And one of the things you might like to do with your webinar console is to submit your questions and your comments. We'll be saving some time at the end of our presentations for a Q&A with the audience, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email either this afternoon or tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording and the webinar slides. And we'll also post all of those materials on our website at cesa.org/webinars. And that's a good URL to know because it is where all of our upcoming and archived webinars are. So with that, I will now pass it over to my colleague, Abby Ramanan. Abby is a project director here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and she's going to get us started.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. To give you all a bit of background about Clean Energy States Alliance, or CESA, we are a bipartisan coalition of state energy agencies from around the country, many of which you can see listed on the slide. Our focus is on working with our members to advance clean energy technologies and foster an equitable and just clean energy transition that benefits everyone. And excuse me, one of the ways that we're doing that is by uplifting models of state energy agency and CBO collaboration for advancing solar in underserved communities. So we're excited to have this webinar today to highlight one such model through the SOMAH program and share some lessons learned from the folks who worked on it. Next slide. So to introduce our amazing panel of speakers today, first we have Sarah Lehrhaupt. Sarah is a senior public utilities regulatory analyst at California Public Utilities Commission, and she leads the SOMAH program at the CPUC. She has been at the PUC for the last 5 years. Sarah has an MBA from the Presidio Graduate School, as well as a degree from UC Berkeley. Before she worked at the CPUC, Sarah worked at the Energy Foundation. Next, we have Sarah Salem. She is the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships for Grid Alternatives. Sarah began volunteering with Grid in the summer of 2018, where she found the unlikely union of her passion for design, environmentalism, and social justice. She earned a Bachelor of Architecture from Temple University and a Master's from UCSB, the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management. Sarah believes in bringing forward the voices and stories of those most impacted by climate change. In her role as Grid's Community Engagement Manager, Sarah strives to break that cycle and provide an equitable and inclusive approach to the way Grid serves communities through all its regional offices. And then finally, we'll have Sheena Robinson. Sheena began work with human rights campaigns while pursuing undergraduate degrees in international studies and political science at Long Beach State and focused on climate disaster relief and food justice. In her role at the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Sheena has served as an executive assistant, building and supporting sustainable infrastructure for the organization. She then moved on to become a policy coordinator, where she organized APEN member leads to pass and implement policies for community resistance and resilience in Oakland, Richmond, and with statewide partners in California. Sheena now connects leaders and host site partners to build a network of community-based climate resilience hubs. Next slide. And now to just give you all a bit of an overview of the content that we'll be focusing on today and what we're building on. This webinar accompanies a case study that the Clean Energy States Alliance put together along with our partners at the CPUC, APEN, and Grid Alternatives on the SOMAH program and how it highlights collaboration between CBOs, nonprofits, and state energy agencies, and how that's led to more equitable impact in the program as a whole. The case study focuses on SOMAH's development from legislation to implementation and how CBOs, nonprofits, and state agencies were all collaborating in those different stages. And we are looking for other models of CBO and SEA collaboration to feature. So if you know of any models of really great work that CBOs and state agencies have been doing in solar, please send an email to myself or my colleagues at CESA. And if you'd like to read more about the case study, I've included the link below, and we'll also be including that in the information that gets shared out after this webinar. Next slide. So with each of these case studies where we look at CBO and SEA collaboration, we really want to make sure that we're providing takeaways that can be used by folks across any state. It doesn't just have to be California. So just to give you all a sense of some of the takeaways and lessons learned that we encountered while developing this case study, some of the things that we learned for CBOs, the focus on kind of building statewide momentum to get legislation like the legislation that enabled the SOMAH program passed takes a lot of time, a lot of investment in building relationships at the legislature, as well as with the solar industry and other members that are outside of kind of the typical network for a lot of CBOs who are working in underserved communities, as well as the focus on bringing the community and policymakers together in kind of non-traditional ways. So not just doing things like advocacy days or bringing folks from the communities that you as a CBO might serve to the policymakers, but also bringing policymakers into communities through things like community tours or equity days, where you kind of bring folks into the areas that might be most impacted by solar legislation or solar programs. And then finally, identifying diverse allies who are, folks working in industry. For SOMAH, the solar industry was involved in getting the initial legislation passed, as well as nonprofits like Grid Alternatives, who were able to kind of bridge the gap between CBOs and state agencies or other key players. And then on the state agency side, we also wanted to provide some key takeaways on how state agencies can best collaborate with CBOs and foster a spirit of equity so that these previously underrepresented groups are seen and heard and able to actively participate in the policymaking and implementation process. So one thing that we found was really beneficial in the case of SOMAH. The CPUC has what's called an environmental and social justice plan that Sarah is going to talk about a little bit in her presentation. And this provided a really great guiding framework for just codifying kind of community collaboration and equity as a priority for the state agency. So you might find something similar to be beneficial if you are a state agency yourself. And then just once you're kind of involved in the process of collaborating with CBOs, making sure you're not overloading them. So prioritizing areas where their expertise is most needed and could be the most impactful, while not kind of creating decision fatigue or overloading them by involving them in every single minute decision that might need to be made in a policy design or implementation process. And then finally, one characteristic that's been really helpful in SOMAH was evaluating frequently and building in multiple feedback loops. So not just having the CBOs or the nonprofits who are involved in implementation providing feedback, but also having an advisory council or kind of other groups who can provide additional quarterly or more frequent feedback than you might have if you're just relying on an annual or multi-year kind of evaluation process. So these are some of the lessons learned that are, we go more in depth into these in the case study. So if you're interested, again, I encourage you to check out the case study and go on our website to download that. So with that, I will stop blathering and I'll let my awesome speakers get started. So I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Abby. I'm Sarah Lehrhaupt with the CPUC, and we're going to talk a little bit today about, sorry, I'm going to try to, okay, it looks like now I have control over the slides. Sam or Abby, can you go forward a slide? Okay, great.
If you try to just click on that first slide, it should work. But if it doesn't work, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Okay, thank you. So first we're going to do kind of an overview of the PUC. I'm going to talk a little bit about our environmental social justice action plan, multifamily solar in California today, and then dive into SOMAH. Sam, can you I'm just going to say next. Okay, thank you. So welcome to the PUC. The PUC oversees private utilities in the sectors of energy, gas, water, and transportation. We support access to safe, clean, and affordable utility services and infrastructure. We were actually created in 1911 as part of and added to the California Constitution to first oversee the railroads. And in California, we have 3 different agencies that oversee the utility and energy sector. So we partner closely with the California Energy Commission and the California Independent System Operator to manage energy generation, the grid, and consumption. And at the PUC and who works here, we have our commissioners, their staff offices, an executive office, a legal group, and advisory bodies like Energy Division, which is where I sit. And we do a mix of advising commissioners on technical matters as well as overseeing the proper implementation of the PUC's adopted rules. And we also have an internal advocacy group, the Public Advocates Office. Next. So in 2019, the PUC adopted an environmental social justice action plan. And the reason for this was that we saw it as an extension of our institutional values of accountability, excellence, integrity, open communication, and being good stewards of environmental justice. And so the goals here are abbreviated slightly just for the purposes of fitting on this slide. But our plan has these same goals a bit more detailed as well as clear objectives, and you can access that from the link on the slide. So as I said before, these were first adopted in 2019 and revised in April of this year. And the ESJ action plan is one of several ethos in how we administer and oversee programs. And so these various guiding documents and plans are a lens that we use over policy and program implementation activities to help us assess different choices or in leading discussions amongst stakeholders. And in my opinion, 3 of these goals that relate really closely to SOMAH are Goal 2, increasing investment in clean energy resources, Goal 4, increasing climate resiliency, and Goal 7, promoting high road career paths and economic opportunity. Next slide. And so we have 2 core programs or ways that folks in California can access multifamily solar. The first is we have a billing mechanism which allows for the sharing of energy export credits between property owners and tenants. And then we also have an offsite mechanism called green tariffs. And this is also referred to as community solar, where customers receive credits on their bill for either contributing to an offsite renewables or having them procured on their behalf by IOUs and the CCAs. And then we have our more traditional incentive-based programs where multifamily solar systems have on-site solar that use NEM, and we have the MASH program, which ended last year, and the solar on multifamily affordable homes. Next slide. So here's kind of a look at the data on California today. This is from our distributed generation statistics website. This data includes VNEM MASH, SOMAH, and VNEM residential only. And most capacity online today is from our MASH and SOMAH programs. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk about SOMAH and the history, program structure, and current information. Next slide. So SOMAH is a pretty big program. We have up to 100 million annually that the funding comes from the electric IOUs greenhouse gas auction allowances. Incentive levels currently are $2.97 a watt for load serving tenants and around $1 for watt serving common areas. And these incentive levels can be reduced depending on tax credit usage for the project, as well as reductions based on expected performance from the solar system. And so big picture, the goals for this program are to develop by 2030 at least 300 megawatts of installed solar generating capacity. We want to encourage solar installations in California's disadvantaged communities across the states and really emphasize the goal that these incentive solar systems are supposed to lower tenant energy bills. We have a unique program administrative structure. We have 4 organizations: Center for Sustainable Energy, Grid Alternatives, the Association for Energy Affordability, and the California Housing Partnership Corporation, who collectively are the program administrator, and each brings its own expertise to the program. And then for eligibility, a multifamily property has to have 5 units or more, be in an IOU territory. The tenant units must be sub-metered, and the property has to be deed restricted rental housing, but we define affordable. There are 2 pathways. Either a majority of the tenants are low income, or the building is located in a disadvantaged community. Next slide. So so the regulatory history. So SOMAH actually has its roots in the California Solar Initiative and in the first incentive program, MASH, which was adopted in 2008. But stakeholders saw that there was a gap and that there needed to be a focused effort to address the needs of affordable multifamily housing because their participation to date was much lower compared to other properties. So in 2015, the legislature adopted AB 693, which established a MASH successor program. And in 2017, the commission had a decision closing a proceeding where the program was rebranded as SOMAH and set some implementation rules. And then in 2019, the SOMAH program was open to applicants. Next slide. So here are the SOMAH program cornerstones, and the colors relate to where the different cornerstones came from. And I think this is important because you can kind of see the evolution of the program here from where the legislature provided input to where the PUC provided direction, and then where proposals came from the SOMAH PA. So AB 693 set our 300 megawatt goal. It required that solar credits primarily go to tenants, that solar project costs cannot be passed to tenants, so there are some tenant protection measures, that we had local hiring requirements to provide economic development benefits to disadvantaged communities, and then we had energy efficiency requirements, which has resulted in SOMAH participants undergoing energy efficiency audits and notifying tenants about the availability of our low-income EE programs. The PUC adopted contractor requirements for safety, reliability, and customer protections, and also required that there be a third-party statewide solicitation process to select the program administrator. And the SOMAH PA proposed having community-based outreach and education, as well as tenant education requirements. Next slide. So in the last minute here, I kind of want to go over some program data, give you the state of play for the program. You can see here some graphs about the reserved capacity and installed capacity, and SOMAH is about 21% of its 300 megawatt goal. And there's a significant amount of incentives that have gone out with the installed and reserved capacity, but there's about 400 million available. Next slide. Some other interesting facts are that there are very few contractors, but with a lot of applications for the SOMAH program. And the other great thing about SOMAH is that a majority of solar credits are allocated to tenants. About 35% of properties, or 35% of applications are in disadvantaged communities. Something else interesting to note is that most solar projects are third-party owned instead of host-owned, and that most trainee work, because we have a workforce development requirement, is on solar installation. Last slide. And some really interesting estimates that came out of a recent evaluation is that because of SOMAH, participants can expect on an estimated basis some really significant first year annual savings. Tenants might see 77% to 84% of their annual bill savings reduced because of their participation in SOMAH. Of course, these are estimated, so there's some assumptions going into this, but just really valuable and meaningful impact. Last slide. So this is my name and my email address, and also the PUC is always hiring, and I'd be happy to take any questions now or offline if you're interested in working here. There are jobs like mine, working in policy and overseeing programs, as well as more technical engineering roles and lots of exciting things to do. So thanks everybody for letting me share and talk a little bit about SOMAH and the PUC today.
Right, next slide.
I'm struggling with that PowerPoint. One second.
No problem. As we get that slide, my name is Sada Salem, she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships for Grid Alternatives and part of the SOMAH PA team, and have been for the last 4 years overseeing our community-based partnerships and our tenant education requirements. And I'll be joined by Sheena Robinson, who is our lead at APEN, to talk about what it looks like when you actually have CBO partnerships on a statewide program. Next slide. Awesome. I'll give you a second to put it. Perfect. Awesome. So who created SOMAH? Sarah graciously shared some of this, but just to reiterate, SOMAH is funded through the greenhouse gas auction proceeds. SOMAH has a program budget of $100 million annually and an overall target of installing 300 megawatts of generated capacity by 2030. It's really important to know the duration of SOMAH because this really does contribute to the ability to have long and trusted relationships with our CBO partners. SOMAH cannot be easily credited to one person or advocate, but rather it's the leadership of Assemblymember Susan Eggman and a representative from Stockton and the western portion of the San Joaquin Valley, and a group of about approximately 20 different 20 different organizations, including nonprofits, environmental justice organizations, stakeholders from the private sector, worked together to pass AB 693 in 2015. This includes CESA, the California Environmental Justice Alliance, and APEN, which Sheena is representing, among other CBOs that really advocated for this work. So I'm going to pass it to Sheena to talk a little bit more about that advocacy in the early years.
Sure, next slide, please. And I'll take a step back. This is really the timeline centered on the policy that has become the SOMAH program. But yeah, speaking to the broad support and the deep organizing of the community-based organizations that are part of the CESA Alliance, we started our policy work and started building the skills and the leadership of our members many years before engaging in this particular policy. So APEN, along with other CBO partners, are deeply rooted in our communities. APEN in particular is rooted in Richmond and Oakland, and works with working class Asian American immigrants and refugees on the front lines of environmental injustice. And our campaigns and our policy work are driven by that vision of our members who want to see solutions enacted based on their lived experience in these kinds of communities. And like I said, we want to not just lift their voices, but make sure that they are building their skills and leadership abilities over time to be the advocates themselves. And CESA as a coalition, holds together similar organizations across the state that are deeply rooted in different environmental justice and like differently impacted communities, who coordinate to lift up our grassroots solutions at the state-wide level. And it's a long-term strategic alliance, a long-term relationship between the organization, and then CESA as an alliance relies on that democratic participation of its member organizations to drive campaigns. And so we actually started doing renewable energy policy work in 2011 and 2012, recognizing that California was leading the way in advancing clean energy, like rooftop solar, but the implementation, only wealthy households and property owners were able to access that. And knowing that most of our communities are renters, living in apartments or older housing, they don't have that decision-making power over their properties, but are still the ones, hit first and worst by the climate crisis and by fossil fuel extraction and burning. So we really started our efforts a few years before this to, build on the successes of MASH, but really working to get those tangible benefits of solar directly to tenants. And so that was why in 2015, we were able to really jump on this opportunity and really excited to engage in the legislation of AB 693. CESA also holds an annual Congresso at the state capitol. And so even though folks are regularly going up to lobby as staff and bringing smaller groups, this is a chance for CESA organizations to come together across an alliance and really bring as many members as possible. And it's a very intergenerational, multilingual event. So we have our youth, starting as young as high schoolers, all the way to our elders, participating and really opening up the process to folks who thought that they wouldn't be able to engage. As refugees, as immigrants, as people who may not speak English or come from different backgrounds. So I just wanted to highlight the Congresso as a really exciting place to move grassroots policy. And I think we've been engaged since then through the rulemaking and ensuring that kind of the big picture that was laid out in AB 693 continued to center equity and center environmental justice communities and center tenants while we're hammering out the details, and then now in implementation. So we've been engaged throughout this whole process and continuing to hold workshops and continue to have community engagement, continuing to update our members about the process and make sure that we're keeping our eyes and ears on the ground for new opportunities to get projects in their communities. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples to bring that timeline to life. So we have in the upper left, one of our leaders saying who is helping vote on policy priorities to guide kind of our strategic path as an organization. In the lower left, we have photos from one of the CESA Congresso lobby days of our leader, Lipo and Sang Chantanasak, who are Lao leaders from Richmond. And yeah, if you're ever in the Capitol during one of these, you'll see a sea of yellow shirts showing our community power. And then on the right hand, these are two pictures from our energy equity tours. So after the policy was passed, we wanted to make sure that we could still have our community engaged. And sometimes hearings can be pretty technical or pretty wonky and hard for folks to take off time to engage in those spaces, especially if they're going to be half a day or a day long. So we arranged these tours across CESA communities. These two are examples from Richmond to help get elected officials and their staff, agency staff, actually out into the field and in these communities to kind of see the conditions and hear from community members themselves about their vision for solar and what they want to see in terms of a just transition away from fossil fuel and extractive economy. So just wanted to bring in these direct pictures of our members and how important that was to open up the process and make sure that folks could keep engaging. Pass it back to Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Sheena. And now we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into our partnerships. We will cover who our CBO partners are, who they serve, and what are their scopes of work to kind of give an idea of how we've worked together. As noted, the SOMAH program is administered by 4 nonprofits: Grid Alternatives, Center for Sustainable Energy, Association for Energy Affordability, and the California Housing Corporation. And in that part, we mandated in our proposal for implementation that we have strong CBO partnerships for the duration of the program implementation, so over the 10 years of the program. This image on the left is we host every year, or actually every quarter, a CBO summit. Biannually, it's in person, and that gives us an opportunity to go and meet our CBOs where they are. So we ensure that we do it in a community that our CBOs serve, and we all come together, all of our CBO partners and program admin team, to talk about program relevant issues. So this was our first in-person post-pandemic chaos in Oakland, hosted by APEN in June of 2022. Next slide. So currently, SOMAH has expanded our partnerships from our original 4 community-based partners to a total of 8 community-based partners in the state of California. This expansion has happened in part to evaluating the program's needs and determining where we have gaps in our program impact. So here you see the logos of our CBO partners, and we'll talk a little bit more about where they're located. Next slide. Awesome, thank you. One way we are able to ensure our partnerships support the most impacted communities in the state is using a tool called EnviroScreen 4.0. On the right, you can see that the community-based organizations that make up our CBO network are located in the most impacted areas. These are areas where the Cal EnviroScreen highlights as disadvantaged communities, which is defined by the top 25% scoring areas that are most impacted by the intersection of environmental, economic, social, and health issues and stressors. Their communities are at the heart of what the environmental justice movement is addressing and who we at the SOMAH program aim to serve and prioritize. The Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 is the only tool that the state has to measure cumulative impact, which is the closest we can get to addressing historic injustice and repairing harm through racial and environmental injustice lens. Our CBOs are extremely diverse because the environmental justice movement is a place-based movement. What is consistent for all of our communities across the state is that they're underserved communities of color who are disproportionately have a higher chance of high rates of asthma, limited access to economic opportunities and growth, live near more polluting sources than other communities, and breathe in more polluted air and have less access to clean water and soil. And this is really important to note that you can see a strong correlation with the communities we aim to serve and who we are partnering with to meet those needs. These same communities also have the least access to technology in the solar space and face more energy insecurity in the state of California and are more likely to face disconnections due to high pay.
Sarah, I think your sound cut out.
Sarah, can you hear us? This fixed. Sarah, can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Could you back up about 1 minute? Your sound had cut out a little bit. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Sorry, y'all. So I'll start. What was the last thing you heard? Maybe, did you guys hear about the EnviroScreen 4.0?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay, so I'll just end it around this, that the EnviroScreen 4.0 indicates the top 25% communities impacted by environmental injustice with 20 different indicators. And programs like SOMAH aim to alleviate these barriers and work closely with our CBO partners to guide our implementation and ensure we center equity both internally and externally. We know we must be intentional in centering the communities we serve, and we recognize we do not fully represent the communities we serve. And I know for my team, I take that to heart. And so what that means is working very closely as listeners, supporting and building solutions with our community-based partners who are a pivotal part of actualizing that goal of centering communities in the state of California. Next slide. Sorry about that, y'all. Man, I was going. All right. So what do we do with our CBOs? How do we work together? So as mentioned, we've been working with our CBO partners for over 3 years now, and we're going into our 4th year of working with them. And that's in due part to in 2019, when we started our partnerships, it took about 6 months to fully onboard our CBOs. And that was because there was a need for capacity building and understanding of the complexities of a program like SOMAH, a program that really does center equity, has tenant education requirements, has job training requirements, has many ways that it is looking at the entire community need when getting solar. And so as we hit that 6-month point and our CBOs were ready to go into the community to address all of the needs and all of their scope, the pandemic hit, and that really pivoted the way our CBOs needed to function, because our CBOs are supporting the most impacted communities. So that meant their focus shifted from SOMAH to actually needing to do things like mutual aid funds and things of that nature. So I know we're close on time, so I'm going to go through this quickly, but our CBO support actually an array of audience types. So they do community at large work, meaning talking about SOMAH, talking about job training opportunities in the public space, but they also do property owner and host customer outreach. So identifying properties within their community that are SOMAH eligible, and then really taking them through the process to ensure that they're able to get the SOMAH incentive and get the energy savings to the community. They also support with our tenant education. We have a robust tenant education requirement where we go and actually do workshops with tenants, ensuring they understand their energy bills and energy efficiency and energy conservation needs. They provide job training support as well, working with local job training organizations, ensuring that the most people who can benefit from SOMAH's opportunities do. And they also work with governmental agencies and stakeholders. What that means is introducing in local localities about the SOMAH program, helping places like the public works area or different legislators talk about SOMAH as a goal for their community. Also, they inform our regulatory decisions, and this is really about the longevity. They were part of the inception of this program, and so they have a keen understanding of how this program is supposed to function once operationalized. And so that means supporting us with handbook changes, supporting us with monitoring and evaluation process. If there's something that happens in the program that was unanticipated, how do we address that? And that includes, recently they supported us in passing a code of conduct for the SOMAH program. And lastly, they amplify community voices. And that is the most important role they play, is ensuring that we as SOMAH PA, and we can ensure that the CPUC knows what is really needed on the ground for these programs. Next slide. And how we collaborate. These relationships are not transactional. We have monthly meetings, we have audience specific support from all folks from our program admin team who support the CBOs. We do quarterly summits, we do media and strategy planning together, and we do programmatic regulatory support. Next slide. And just to leave you all with some key lessons we have learned as program admin, is that financial compensation is a must. We cannot continue to tap into community organizations and leaders and not compensate them for their time equitably. Also, sustained financial support. We at SOMAH have had the ability to make our partnerships longer than just a year, and that has really led to our CBOs really understanding the program, but also creating understanding within the community that is not just in and out. And that is super important. And I recognize that we have a 10-year funding cycle, but in most, if you can, as state agencies, consider how to make long-term investments that allow both your program administrative team and your CBOs to really get into the deep work that's needed to make these changes. Trust takes time. I noted that we were with our CBOs during the global pandemic. That also was the move for Black Lives Matters, Stop Asian Hate, and all of those, we are real people really feeling these shifts. And so it has been a relationship we've built together, that we support each other, and we also understand that the work at hand has to be responsive to the actual need of community. Next is capacity must be built and nurtured. Technical support is necessary. Don't be afraid to change course. What that means is you might have thought you and the CBO could do this one thing, but it actually shifts a little bit because you're learning that it doesn't make sense based on the community need. And so be limbo with that, with those KPIs and those goals that you guys create. And listening is key. It's a partnership, it's a collaboration, and the best collaborations give a little, take a little, and create together. And I will now send it back to Sheena to close us out about the CBO perspective.
Sure. Next slide, please. Cool. Yeah, so just lifting up the role from CBOs. You know, APEN has a history of developing policy from the vision of our members that is very intersectional, that touches you know, clean energy, energy efficiency, health, renter protections, greater participation. And so that's definitely translated, and the skill sets have translated to SOMAH. And just knowing that, yeah, folks really do want to be engaged about the things that impact their daily lives and opportunities to save money, to feel secure in their homes, to be part of that clean energy economy transition. And I think these photos are great and really highlight the way in which we can have flexibility because of our relationships and understanding the different types of learning or accessibility needs that our community members have. For example, APEN members have different levels of formal education. Our Mien members, who are, you know, a minority from Laos, don't have a written language, so we have to be really creative in finding ways to keep things really accessible and engagement high. And CBOs have the best perspective on how to do that and have trusted relationships with interpreters, community leaders themselves, and knowing how to create kind of safe, welcoming, accessible meeting spaces, and have the staff capacity to follow up over time and a long term. And so building on Sarah's point about the funding, you know, this has allowed us to have a dedicated staff member for several years, because although we do have, you know, organizing teams for our different communities, they're also holding so many other campaigns that affect our members, you know, locally and statewide, regarding climate, housing and safety, etc. So being able to merge our expertise with that of SOMAH has been really important, I think, to help shape the implementation and any future energy policy that we build on after SOMAH. And then, yeah, the pandemic has been a huge learning point too. And I actually want to lift up how this relationship between the CBOs and the PA has also been, you know, we've been really responsive to the changing conditions of the pandemic, and making sure that the benefits of not just solar, but the energy efficiency, the job training are also uplifted, since many folks were experiencing hardships due to, you know, utility bill debt, because of the furloughs or layoffs, or not being able to you know, work as usual. So really being able to lift up the multiple benefits of this program that are geared directly to the tenants, and learn from those. Next slide, please. And then to speak a little bit about, yeah, being part of a CBO cohort. The PA is made up of multiple organizations, and the CBO team is also made up of multiple organizations. And I think that offers a lot of richness and is important for a program that is running across the state. The CBO cohort itself, you know, allowed for SEHA and, you know, additional partners to be brought in to really lean on each other and learn from each other in this process, and understand maybe the nuanced different places we're coming from with dealing with different geographic issues and different utility jurisdictions, but offering a unified environmental justice perspective. And then just, yeah, again, the relationship with community and community members before the program, and being able to utilize those existing networks. You know, example of that was before the SOMAH program was up and running, APEN members who were familiar with the legislation, you know, we were doing refresher workshops to make sure folks were keeping it in their mind after the very busy and kind of hectic legislative season. And some members actually went to their, they live in affordable housing property, and went to their housing site manager and inform the property owner about the program, and that building is in the SOMAH pipeline today. So I think that's a really great example of you know, folks feeling really empowered to do that and excited to access this kind of program. And then, yeah, just to reiterate to the long-term relationship with the PA and the ability to learn and build trust over many years, and also across different departments and even sectors of expertise. The PA has, you know, the different focus of the job training and the solar side, and I think we're learning a lot of more technical expertise as well that is growing our skills as advocates. Let's see. And next slide, please. And I'll close with this one. You know, this program actually has a really special place for APEN. It's the first policy that we've been involved in from kind of the inception or policy idea, and supported the passage and guided the rules and continued to be there for implementation. So there's a lot of lessons for us too around how to organize, you know, in the very fast-paced and more big picture stage of passing legislation to the much more like long-term and detailed and kind of like nitty-gritty side of that implementation, and being able to be part of it at the stage where we're actually getting to see the tangible projects and tangible multiple direct benefits to our community members across the state, and is just really exciting. And this is definitely, you know, something that we want to keep sharing the lessons from to be able to replicate this model of continuing deep community engagement through a policy's extended life cycle. You know, and we're only a few years in, but because of the kind of start delays and time it took to figure out a program of this scale, and then the pandemic, you know, I think looking back 5 years from now, there'll be even more success stories, and even more environmental justice community members participating and driving the transition to a renewable energy economy. And I'll close with that.
All right, thank you all so much for that amazing presentation. And we thankfully have a good chunk of time for questions. So if you haven't submitted your question into the question box yet, please do, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. One of the first ones to come up, one of the first ones I'll ask is, I wonder if all of you could go into a bit of detail about the funding mechanism for compensating the CBOs for their work on the PA, and kind of just the mechanism for that.
I think, Sarah, you can give the CPUC's perspective and I can provide the PA's maybe.
Well, you know, Sarah, Grid has kind of owned those contracting relationships, so I was kind of waiting for you to respond.
Okay, no problem. So for the SOMAH program, we have about 1% of the auction proceeds goes towards the program, or 10%, sorry, 10% of the auction proceeds go towards the PA to support with the administration of the program. A big chunk of that is our MENO efforts, and so that's where our funding comes from for the CBOs. We have noted and been transparent with our CBOs that the way the program has been designed is the biggest funding source kind of came 2019, 2020 into 2021, and then we're slowly tapering off. But that's a convention that actually makes a lot of sense, given that the first few years for the CBOs, it's a lot of capacity building and technical support, and then slowly we've been tapering down those budgets as the years have gone by, because they're much more able to go and be in the field and don't need as much administrative support from us as the PA. But what that also means is when we're talking through scopes, we end up doing our renegotiations starting about, we do something called our mid-contract check-in. Not a review, it's just a check-in to see how things are going. In that moment, we take the opportunity to shift anything that needs to be shifted, whether that's scope, whether that's budget, that's re-looking at what we're thinking about for the year coming ahead. And then we try to have all contracts recontracted before the next contract lapse if both the CBO and the PA feels that that region and that community-based partnership wants to continue that relationship. And so what we try to do is just be very communicative throughout the entire process and ensure that the budgets make sense with the scopes of work. So we have CBOs at different levels of budget based on what work they're doing and how much capacity they have as a CBO to do that effort. APEN's a great example where they've really tapered down in the last couple of years because they have very specific scopes they want to focus on and have very specific ways they want to support their community, and their capacity has shifted. And so we support them in that and have conversations throughout our relationship to ensure that we're ready and they're ready for whatever changes are coming.
Great. And kind of building on that, I wonder if, maybe this is for Sarah or Sheena, have you all also incorporated compensating like volunteers that work at the CBOs or community members if they're attending trainings, and how is that structured differently from, you know, just the general funding for the CBOs on the PA?
Sheena, you go for it because I'll talk to
you. At APEN, we haven't compensated volunteers or attendees of the workshops, but we do spend some of our funding just making sure that when we do gather, you know, things like meals are covered, especially, you know, these meetings might be in the evenings, right, when people get off work, making sure that there's childcare for these meetings. Funding goes to interpreters. Many of our meetings are held in, you know, multiple languages at a time. And so I would say that's more, or maybe, you know, meeting materials and supplies. I will say we do have that model. We do have like a youth internship program, and they do get stipends, but they're not specific to SOMAH. They do guide a lot of our resilience work, and I think we'll be looking in the next year of really building out a more kind of transitional age or like young working adult base that might have a lot more interest in the job training aspects of SOMAH, and so that's something that we could definitely consider.
I'll also add to that the property owners often have a role to play in tenant education, and they are really good partners, and they receive incentive money from SOMAH for their solar installation, but not direct funding to do what they normally do, just help provide a room, or sometimes they provide the food. So there definitely is a lot of coordination that the SOMAH PA and the CBOs do with the property owners themselves, and to get their contributions to meeting the program requirements, as well as, you know, just their normal course of business and supporting their residents. Oh, and I did want to add one more thing about the administration for, in our regulations, the PUC has permitted the PA to have a 10% cap on the administrative budget over the life of the program. And that's really different from a lot of other programs in California where that's an annual cap. And so what's been really nice about that is that the SOMAH PA has been able to fund a lot of that upfront work and building systems, learning from CBOs, and just all the other things that go into kicking off a program. So they've been able to spend a lot more in these initial years, and then are going to kind of taper off, or, you know, their spending is going to match the program needs, but it's not capped on an annual basis. And that's been, I think it's been really beneficial to the team.
Awesome. So getting into kind of the implementation portion, I wonder if all of you could speak to just the types of properties that are successfully participating in the program, and also what obstacles you've encountered in getting either affordable housing owners or whoever kind of participating and successfully accessing the incentives.
I'll take that question first. The program's definitely at an inflection point. You know, when SOMAH first opened, there immediately was a wait list. there were a lot of active properties and contractors, solar contractors, who were eagerly waiting for the doors to open. And so there was a huge influx of applications. And we've actually kind of seen that taper off this year, especially. And the PA has done a really good job, doing some internal assessment, and the commission also recently did a program evaluation to provide an independent voice and some feedback on like where the program could be strengthened. And the PA is in the process right now of putting those changes into place. So hopefully we'll start to see some movement. But some of the things that were highlighted in the program evaluation that I can highlight here is that right now the program has an incentive step down, but the evaluation found that the need for incentives is ongoing, and having the step down created some uncertainty. There were some barriers that they noted from property owners around access to financing, when incentives come, as well as, the SOMAH program has a lot of requirements. You don't come through SOMAH with, a solar project that's, done quick and dirty. You have to have job training, you have to have tenant education. And so some of these things are new for owners and maybe they're not as familiar. I mean, the evaluation did find that property owners generally were very happy with SOMAH and contractors were very happy with SOMAH. However, there was a lot of effort. And so, sometimes that perception of burden might keep someone from doing the next project. And that's some of the things the team is working on now, is refining, providing more support, improving technical assistance, and trying to really make the upfront lift much easier on the property owner. So it's not so scary. So upfront, oh, this is kind of the incentive I might get. These are the project costs. So I think they're doing a great job kind of figuring out how to set expectations and provide additional knowledge to kind of bring down any barriers around mistrust, lack of knowledge, and hopefully those things will raise participation in the future.
And to add on that, our CBOs do property owner engagement, and it has been probably one of the biggest learning curves, I think, for us as the PA, and I think for the CBOs, and really learning how to build the capacity to do the property owner outreach. And our CBOs are pulling in more projects every year with their understanding, and also ensuring that we get to the properties that aren't as easily accessible or might not be showing up on our different databases that we use to figure out where properties are. And so maybe Sheena can speak a little bit about your experience with property owner outreach.
Yeah, I think, speaking to kind of the wait list and demand when it started, we know that, that was kind of focused on larger buildings and maybe larger contractors that had the capacity and knowledge of the program to apply right away. And I think our role, both in addition to just, really wanting to connect the buildings where our members live to the program, it's also trying to find maybe the smaller buildings, smaller property owners, and there's different tracks within the program in terms of the application process. And so the one that features a lot more upfront technical assistance is where we've been focusing to make sure that those harder to reach properties can get connected. And I think, speaking to the learning curve, it's also, and the timeline that we're learning about implementation in general is that, property owners, they might have a plan to, I think the term is re-syndicate, but basically like renovate their buildings. And so want to be able to time, a solar installation and this big disruption with any other work they'd be doing to kind of maintain and upgrade the building. And making sure all of that pencils out is a lot of work. So it does take kind of that extended timeline to be able to follow up and hold that relationship.
Awesome, thank you. I think we have time for one last question. So this might be for Sarah or Sheena. Do you all have any tips for administering or implementing a program across a really wide geographic area that has a lot of different communities, different geographies, different languages? yeah, just really diverse area.
Yeah, I think as a program admin, and when I started in this role, I inherited the CBO partnerships after they had been contracted. And I really took to heart, and I can only speak from my perspective, that I lived in Oakland, and Oakland is not all of California. And so made a point of going out and reaching out and meeting all the CBOs where they were at and having awareness of their different needs, and then creating spaces for us to be together. So I think when you're administrating a program across such a large state, it's really important to recognize that every community has different needs. And so what's working, for example, in the Bay Area is not going to work for the Central Valley. And really, as you as the program administrator, doing the work to understand what needs exist in that community. Our Central Valley team, for example, we visited them this summer because we couldn't during the pandemic. And we drove most of the day to different communities to learn about what it means to be in a rural community and how solar makes sense in a rural community and how job training opportunities make sense in a rural community. And so as a program admin, it is your responsibility to not just like show up, but also humble yourself, because we don't represent, again, the communities we serve. And our CBOs do, and listening and showing up and really bringing capacity support is pivotal. And so I'll give it to Sheena.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, the current CBO cohort represents organizations working in the Bay, in the Central Valley, and LA, and San Diego. And even though that is, you know, a wide swath of the state, our organizations also don't represent all the communities in those. You know, APEN works with a very specific community, and we also have a role in making sure that we're connecting to local partners about this program, and our local alliances within our cities and our counties. And yeah, so I think everyone has a role to play in kind of learning and expanding.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sheena, Sarah, and Sarah. And thank you all so much for attending this webinar. Like we said, you can learn more if you're interested in this case study. It's available on our website, and we also have tons of upcoming webinars in the month of December. Those are just a few that are listed there. So yeah, thank everyone so much for attending, and to our speakers again, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you all.